chairman of universities, ladies and gentlemen. I have come here to talk to you about Europe. Once more, some of you might say, and they will have to get used to that because I will keep doing it, and because that is certainly our fight. This is our history, our identity, our horizon, what protects us and what gives us a future. Already, is it really necessary, others will say, because it's never the right time to talk about Europe. It's always either too early or already too late. They've gotten used to the tactic. It's so much easier never to explain where you're going, where you want to lead your nation, and to keep a number of hidden arguments because actually you've lost sight of the objective. It's so much more comfortable to spend whole sessions talking about instruments and technicalities without knowing what the vision is. And so everyone has gotten used to not saying what they think, what they want, and making others believe that it's actually a refined tactic or strategy. And experience shows that this leads nowhere. Speaking about Europe here at the Sorbonne is meaningful. We are all sensitive to the prestige and beauty of this monument. But before it was a building, the Sorbonne was an idea put forward by a few scholars and their disciples. It is not this amphitheater that makes the Sorbonne what it is. The reason the Sorbonne is well alive today, it's because of how attached the professors and students are to knowledge. That is the idea, an idea that has gone through the centuries. Europe, too, is an idea carried by optimists, visionaries, an idea which we need to reappropriate for ourselves again and again, because the most beautiful ideas, those that drive us forward and improve the human fate, are always fragile. And Europe will only live through the idea of it that we have. It is up to us to make it stronger, more meaningful, and not be obsessed with the given format that history has given it, because the format will change, but the idea remains, and the ambition should be our ambition. Acting collegially was the ideal of Robert de Sorbonne. And from everywhere, the scholars came from all across Europe through times of war, through times of crisis, through the trials and tribulations of European history. This thought kept growing and radiating its light. And where chaos might have triumphed, the fact was that always it was civilization that triumphed. We are the heirs of this whole history of two major wars that should have plunged our continent into darkness. The wars of the past century, the two world wars that decimated Europe and might have engulfed us altogether. But together, we have overcome this pain without ever forgetting the lessons drawn from those wars. The idea, again, the ideal, have triumphed. The desire for fraternity has been stronger than vengeance or hatred. And so the founding fathers' fantastic idea was to create this energy into a peaceful rivalry, so to say, with the common market for steel and coal, or the common market. That was the promise. When Greece, Portugal, or Spain entered the common market one generation later, those were not technical terms. For every country going out of dictatorship, those words were the concrete echo of liberty. When what we then called Eastern Europe, from Poland to Bulgaria, also joined this vision one generation later, again, we found the same hope for a brighter future. For many countries that had seen the worst oppression of political regimes, it was the promise of a brighter future. And perhaps we were not aware enough that this Europe was growing, separated from a number of things, from the rest of the world. Safety was not an issue because that was guaranteed by the US. Its economic purpose was clear, doing as well as the US, but it was also growing separated from the peoples. This incipient European vision was the vision of just a few. The vital challenge that I've just outlined is still here, but the barriers behind which Europe could grow are no longer with us. And here we are with a Europe that is more fragile than ever, bearing the brunt of globalization as we know it and falling victim, what is worse, to some ideas like nationalism, identitarianism, protectionism, hunkering down behind a false notion of sovereignty. And so these dangerous ideas of the past are growing once more, and they claim legitimacy because they are exploiting the fears, the actual fears of peoples. For too long, we did not want to see how powerful they were, and were pretty certain that the past would never come back, and that we'd learned our lesson, and that we could just be relaxed about it and rest on our laurels. Abandon a portion of this hope and ambition of the European project because we were just taking those things for granted. But the sad, dark passions of Europe are still here, very much with us, reaffirming themselves. And successful in lying to the people about the cohort of pain and tragedy that always goes with them. And the reason they're successful is because we have made it possible for those ideas to be possible, because we stopped being strong about expressing that ambition and defending Europe and making proposals for Europe. Because we have let doubt be instilled into the minds of our peoples. What are these people saying to our populations? That they have the solution, that they can protect them against all challenges, climate change, the digital transformation, migrations. But the truth is, those are all global challenges, and one country in isolation can do very little to combat those. So they're lying to our peoples, but we let them do it because we kept saying that Europe was first and foremost a bureaucracy, that whenever something went wrong, it was not our fault, it was Brussels' fault, forgetting that we are Brussels at every point in time. And so we gave up on this idea. And so I will net absolutely nothing go by. I will not, those people pass any of their proposals. They are lying to our populations, and we should be the ones making new proposals for Europe. Because indeed, we cannot allow ourselves to have always the same habits and words and budgets and systems in place. We can certainly go the way of hunkering down on our own nations. Because it's a lie that hunkering down on your own country is ever going to be a successful path. The only path that is a path to a brighter future, and the one that I wanted to talk about today is our path. It is our decision to make, refounding a sovereign, united, and democratic Europe. That's what we have to do, and let us be bold together and try this new path. As I have told the French many times before, let me repeat it today with intact conviction. Our Europe is too inefficient and too slow today, but Europe alone can allow us to have a say in the world as it is transforming itself today. Only Europe can allow us to exist in this changing world and environment, to defend our values and interests. It is necessary to build Europe. Why? Because what constitutes and forges our deep identity, this balance between our values, the way we relate to liberty, human rights, and collective justice is something that is absolutely unique on the face of the planet. The way that we care about the market economy, but at the same time about social justice, that is also the definition of what Europe is. And that is something that you will not find on the other side of the Atlantic or on the other end of the Eurasian continent. So it is up to us to defend what is ours, those ideas, those values, and stop doing what we've been doing for too long. That is losing our time, wasting our time in the European civil war of words. Rather, we should think of ways to build a stronger Europe in the world as it is, and as a result, create the 6 keys of sovereignty and freedom. And in face of all of these challenges, we need to do a number of concrete things. The first key, the foundation of any political system, is safety. In Europe, we're seeing a dual trend, a progressive disengagement and inevitable disengagement of the U.S., and, on the other hand, a sustainable terrorist phenomenon whose mission is to fracture our free societies. In these areas, at long last, Europe has realized how frail it is and how important it is to act together, to fight against terrorism, to fight terrorist propaganda on the internet. A few of the EU's countries have started doing that together. We need to reinforce our common safety and create a space for common defense and safety. In terms of Europe's defense and autonomy, we now have a foundation for that, which has emerged over the past few months. In June last, we have laid the foundation of this Europe of defense with a permanent, structured cooperation between our countries, allowing us to take increased commitments to move ahead together and better coordinate, and even have a European fund for defense to finance our research and our defense capabilities. We are, at long last, giving a substance to that through exchanges between the various member states of the EU that want to move in that direction. But we need to go further than that. What Europe is lacking today, what this Europe of defense is lacking today, is a common strategic culture. Our inability to work together in a convincing manner challenges our credibility as Europeans. We do not have the same parliamentarian, historical, political cultures. We do not have the same mentalities, and certainly we're not going to change that overnight. But I suggest that we should start creating this shared culture by putting together a European intervention culture. And in order to do that, we need profound change. This is why I suggest to our partners that we should welcome into our national armies, and in fact, let me broach this initiative to welcome into the French army soldiers from all over Europe to participate in works for planning, intelligence, support for operations, etc. At the beginning of the next decade, as a result, Europe will have to have a common intervention force, a common budget, and a common doctrine to act. I want this common culture to be extended to the fight against terrorism and hence to our intelligence services. And so I want to see the creation of a European Intelligence Academy to reinforce the links between our countries through shared information and shared training courses. In the face of terrorism, the Europe of defense must be our shield. Terrorists are infiltrating everywhere into Europe, and those groups have their ramifications everywhere in Europe, and that's why we have to act on both operations and prevention, which is why we should put together a European prosecutor's office against terrorism, over and beyond the competences that have just been created at European level. Safety, as we have tragically seen over the past months, is not just bombs and Kalashnikovs. Climate changes, dramatic climate change is threatening our safety as never before. And every week in Europe, people die because of climate change, which is why I want to have a European civilian force to help pull together our intervention capabilities and will make it possible to fight droughts or fires or earthquakes together. A united Europe to protect its citizens, to intervene, to save lives would be a Europe that regains this sense of fraternity, which is supposed to be at its heart, going beyond mere words and demonstrating the power of collective action. The second key, as a result, is ensuring our sovereignty at European scale, on the European plane, protecting our borders by preserving our values. The migrant crisis is not a crisis. It is a challenge and one that is here to stay for a long time. It is born out of the profound inequalities of globalization. And Europe is not an island. We are here, and our destiny is linked to that of the Middle East or Africa. In the face of this challenge, again, we have to find answers at a European level. It is only with Europe that we can effectively protect our borders, welcome the people we need to welcome, and send away those we cannot welcome. If we do not help the nations in Europe that bear the brunt of these migratory flows, as long as we are unable to organize the return of migrants that do not have asylum rights, we will lack effectiveness as well as humanity. So in the coming years, Europe must accept that this is going to be its major challenge, and we only have one option. Or one alternative. Either we hunker down on our borders, which would run contrary to our rules on immigration and asylum, and that, in fact, is why I want to reform asylum law, to create an asylum office at European level, harmonizing our national procedures to put in place safe biometric files, because we are handling tens of thousands of asylum requests that have already been refused by our European partners. I want for us to have an effective European border police that everywhere in Europe does strict border control and makes sure that those who cannot stay here are returned to their countries. Making sure also that we have a large-scale integration program for refugees, helping those who have risked their lives to leave their countries and come to ours. That is our common duty as Europeans, and we should not lose sight of that.
Mais nous devons le faire sans laisser le fardeau à quelques-uns.
But we must do it was not imposing the bulk of the burden on just a few countries, and act in consultation between European countries to choose where people will live, where they will work. Certainly, this is something that must be started at national level. We must start this work at home, which is why I have started a big program in France to better welcome the refugees, accelerate asylum procedures, drawing inspiration from the German model, being more effective in returning those who have not obtained asylum to their countries. So France is starting to do its share of the work at home. Also, we must have a longer-term vision. In fact, let me be very clear about it. Let's not be squeamish about it. Even the strongest borders, the strongest migration policies will not be able to stop long-term migrations. Only the stabilization and development of the source countries will stop those migrations over time. What is creating those migrations are the economic conditions in these countries and the subsequent crises. If Europe has to have a border, and that's true, it certainly is, we are a continent that needs to have borders. But also, more importantly, we need to have very clear priorities in how we relate to other parts of the world, the Mediterranean to start with, which we have turned our back on and have refused to see the crises happening in the Mediterranean area, though these crises have repercussions for us. And democracies in the Mediterranean area must be consolidated, hence the initiatives recently taken on Sahel and Libya. But more broadly speaking, we should not see Africa as a threatening neighbor, but like a strategic partner. In terms of how we tackle youth employment, technological revolutions, the fight against climate change, I want our partnership to Africa to be one component of the new foundation of Europe. Official development aid must rise. I've taken that commitment for France. In fact, we have taken that decision to raise the figure of French official development aid, but we also have to make it more effective, and we will make sure we do that. But development aid should also be a European policy with a new ambition for that. And in this regard, I want to relaunch a project of financial transaction tax at a European level in order to fund this policy. We know exactly what the terms of this debate are. Why are these initiatives, why do these initiatives seem to fail every time?
qui ont une taxe sur les transactions financières.
Well, I have a concrete suggestion to make. There are two countries that have similar tax in Europe. This France. In fact, it was not me, it was a predecessor of mine. Let's take this tax and generalize it to the rest of Europe. In fact, I would be ready to give the whole of the proceeds from that French tax to European development aid. But there's another country that also has its financial transactions tax, and that's the UK. And they've had it for much longer than us. And so it's the stamp duty. And so if some say there might be disloyal competition, it's true. If we had a huge tax, which had been envisaged for, by some of our predecessors for those who would come later and would have broken our ability to create economic activity. But if we supported that UK stamp tax, nobody could tell us that it would create a distortion for the EU economy. So let's do it at the right level, at the right scale, but let's do it. And I'm prepared to do anything to go in that direction. As you will have understood, the third key of our sovereignty is this foreign policy, the partnership with Africa, a development policy that should lead us to have a large vision in place based on education, health, energy. If Europe doesn't seize this opportunity, well, others will. And if nobody does it, then Europe alone will have to suffer the consequences of inaction. The fourth key of our sovereignty is the ability to respond to one of the major transformations of this world, the ecological transformation. This total transformation completely revolutionizes the way we produce, the way we behave, everything. And right now, Europe is a bit in a bit of a limbo. And so the question is clear. Do you want to keep doing business as usual and lose competitiveness versus countries and powers that are making the right choices? Or do you want to speed up what we do and be the leaders of a new productive model that's not just a business model or an economic model, but a societal and civilizational model, which will make it possible to rethink the question of equality and inequalities in our societies, the victims of which are, of course, the most frail and already the poorest in our societies. So I've made that choice. I really think that Europe should be at the vanguard of this effective, equitable, fair transition. And in order to do it, you need to invest and you need to create encouragements and for the transition. Have a price of carbon that is high enough to foster this transition. Again, that will be an uphill struggle. There will be lobbies and there will be a degree of resistance with people saying, it's a good idea, but just a few euros. The truth is, if in the years to come we don't have a price of carbon ton that is not high enough, significant enough to reorient our economies, then it won't work. Under 20 to 30 euros a carbon ton, all studies show that it's not going to be effective. And so that's the road we should be taking. And we need to organize ourselves in order to do it. We need a high enough threshold price, a single price that a harmonized price that will help us move forward and support the territories that will suffer the consequences of climate change by bringing about companies and contracts and new jobs. This transition also forces us to have a really operational energy market, European energy market, and so to really start promoting interconnections. We put a great break on interconnections for a long time because it was not in the interest of our corporations. But together with Spain and Portugal and all of our neighbors, really, we need to develop these interconnections because at some seasons where renewables are abundant, we need other parts of Europe to benefit from them. And where carbon is not, when Europe carbon is not expensive, we also need to pool it together. We'll have a better, more effective European energy market if these interconnections are in place. In order to be successful in this strategy, we also need to make sure that for our industrial companies that are most exposed to globalization, that they can fight on an equal footing with other parts of the world that do not have the same environmental constraints, which is why we need a carbon border tax. For Europe, it is crucial. So a threshold price for carbon, interconnections on the grid, transition contracts for our regions and territories, a border tax on carbon. Those are the four pillars of this energy vision for Europe. This, of course, cannot be achieved overnight, and I know that some will be reluctant. But if we refuse to talk about it or to move in that direction, I know one thing, it'll never happen. So let's give ourselves a firm 5-year or 10-year objective, and let's build the transition structures that will take us there. But let's start working right now. And Europe should be at the forefront of this energy transition, and it needs its transition. It needs this unified market to build this model. Now, this EU ambition should not be defensive only. This is why I suggested we also put in place a European industrial program to support clean vehicles and to create common infrastructures so that it's possible to travel through Europe without ruining Europe. We need big, large-scale projects. Well, that's one, and it will reconcile our industrial ambitions in this area. We need a Europe that guarantees this level of demand in ecological terms is also a Europe of food safety. And so we should not be squeamish about asking ourselves the right questions. Is it true that our common agricultural policy actually protects our farmers and our consumers? Now, I've been looking at what happened over the past few years. That is clearly not my feeling. And so we've gotten to a point, a paradoxical point, where the agricultural common policy has become a French taboo when our farmers are railing against it. So the agricultural policy coming from Europe should not be one more layer of administration of French or European regions and all agricultural sectors, and in fact a revenue policy that sort of supports a transition, but not always, not in all cases, creating complex schemes that are so hard for us to explain to our populations. The agricultural policy of Europe should protect the revenues of our farmers effectively whilst protecting them from large-scale crises, helping them building a more responsible agriculture. Of course, there will still exist various agricultural models across Europe, and I want every country to be able to support that transition according to its own preferences. But this new common agricultural policy, so it's not bureaucratic and unfair, should be the instrument of our sovereignty in face of the big challenges of globalization. In other words, it should give renewed vitality and ambition to our rural regions. In other terms, I want us to be able to open a frank discussion about this policy, which should, first of all, protect us against regions of the world whose policies might endanger our food safety, promote a large-scale European food transition, and also leave more flexibility at country level in order to organize the various regions and the various agricultural sectors. Having less bureaucracy, let regions themselves make their own choices about how their own sectors and crops are organized. What the Europeans want and request from us is to trust the ingredients and foodstuffs they use on a daily basis. That, in fact, is part and parcel of the food safety I mentioned earlier on. Again, in this regard, Europe is crucial. The role of Europe is crucial. We saw that last summer with what is now known as the eggs crisis. We have seen that a malfunctioning in one part of Europe, because we're an integrated market, will have consequences elsewhere in Europe, and so doubt on our food safety because our citizens, legitimately enough, want to have the truth in real time on these issues, which is why we need a European investigation and control force to fight fraud, guarantee food safety, ensure the respect for quality standards everywhere in Europe. That is another transformation that we need to lead. Now, in this regard, I support Chairman Juncker's choice or decision to put an end to double standards everywhere in Europe and to make sure that this force can be the guarantor of this legitimate request by European citizens. Another request of European citizens is that they want to trust the experts. Our recent debates on glyphosate, on endocrine disruptors show the need for European-wide, more transparent, more independent investigations and analyses, making it possible to analyze risk and suggest alternative solutions. It's crucial. It's indispensable. Right now, we have political debates that sometimes seek to substitute for scientific debate. Now, it's up to science really to show what is risky and not, and it is science's role to transparently show what possible scientific alternatives are. And this science should never be silenced by experts, by politicians, and certainly the voice of science should never be silenced by the voice of lobbyists, industrialists. The fifth key to our sovereignty is the world of digital. Digitalization is also linked to a profound change within our societies and even the way we think of the world. The digital transformation is not an industrial sector. It is not anecdotal. And it is a field in which Europe has much to gain, but also much to lose. Europe is very keen to reconcile security, safety, equality, liberty, and that's at stake in this era of digitalization. Europe, which grew so fast after the Second World War, must now take the bull by its horns and go all out to attract the entrepreneurial and scientific talent around digitalization. I know that some are sometimes unhappy about that. It is the policy that I have in mind for my own country, economically speaking. We're no longer at a period of history where our economies can grow as if our countries were closed and talents could not travel and entrepreneurs were actually tied to a stake. You could be sorry about it if you want, but this current revolution is about talent, and fostering that revolution is attracting new talent. That is, in fact, the meaning of what the government is doing, what the Prime Minister, the Minister of Economy and Finance, and the Minister of Innovation and Higher Education are doing within the cabinet. We will keep doing that, but Europe too needs its own ambition in this field.